Hi. Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone had a good breakfast. Now, let me start with my presentation. First, let me introduce myself. I'm Attorney Carms Peña from the Ateneo de Naga University College of Law, Ignatian Legal Apostolate Office. I'm currently the director, and I'm also teaching at the College of Law. Now, let's start. The Syria Project. Um, Before I um, introduce the project, let me first tell you about Ateneo. Now, Ateneo started classes only last June 2017. And thankfully, when the law school was established, our legal aid clinic was also established within just weeks of when class first started. We were lucky then because we had the support of the school, we had a director, a resident attorney, and our own office. And even before the Supreme Court revised the law student practice rule, our students were lucky because we already had a legal aid clinic. Now our mission from day one, we've always founded on the idea that more than becoming good lawyers, we wanted our students to become Ignatian servant lawyers. We wanted to instill the love for service. I always tell my students that when you graduate in the Ateneo, I'll assure you that you'll be a good lawyer. But more than that, I want you to be a lawyer with a soul. You're a person first before you're a lawyer. So let's work on that. Now, when we opened the Ignatian Legal Apostolate Office, because we were just a new school, the operations were manned by our first year students. They were always there during weekdays, after classes, before classes, to have their duty. And from there, they used ELAW to engage in various public orientations, policy and ordinance formation, legal counseling, and of course, in serving our clients, we ask them to do the interviews, the drafting of the legal documents, and any grunt work that we could give them. Because as of yet, they weren't allowed to appear in courts to represent clients. Now, when they graduated last 2021, there were 27 graduates, but only 26 took the bar. We are very grateful that 100% was our passing rate. Every single one of these now lawyers actually went through ELAW. And I'm very confident, and I can claim this, that they passed the bar because there were active interns of ELAW. Because in the 4 years of their stay in the Ateneo, from the first year to the fourth year, there were already active members of legal aid. They were already provided clinical legal education. And that helps because even before becoming lawyers, they were already immersed into the practice of law. Now, in ELAW, we have three main advocacies anchored on three desks. First is the migrant workers desk, which sets out to respond to the human rights violations of the overseas Filipino workers. It could be discrimination, exploitation, and human trafficking. But remember that these are not the only violations that they face. There are many untold vulnerabilities, and some we don't even know about. For the Migrant Workers Desk, we actually partnered with the International Pro Bono Alliance. Through the help of the Asia Foundation, we were connected with IPBA. Now, for our second desk, the Jail Decongestion Desk, we partnered with HLAF, and our students conduct monthly jail visits. They conduct monthly paralegal training, and they go to court to follow up the cases of the PDLs. They meet with POW lawyers to follow up as to the status of the case of the PDLs. For this program, what we really want to happen is that at the bare minimum, we could at least decongest all the jails in Bicol. And we're actively working on that. Now, for our third desk, the environmental desk, we're partnered right now with Client Earth, the Manila Observatory, and a consortium of Ateneo Law Schools in the Philippines. ILAW is currently the head clinic of the Climate Justice Capacity Initiative, which aims to normalize, to bring to the fore an acute awareness of the need for us to preserve our ecosystems and biodiversity. We want the people of Naga to understand that there is an urgency for us to solve the climate crisis. It's not just an abstract idea. So for our environmental desk, we actually go down to all 27 barangays of Naga City. One funny anecdote I can share with you was to show that to make the people in the barangay understand what climate change is, what it's doing to the world. One of my students asked one of, I think he was a jeep driver. I can't remember already. The student asked him to come forward and asked him if she could perform an example. She explained that what she'll do, and the jeep driver said yes. What she did was she put a plastic bag over his head and then asked him, "How are you feeling, sir?" The man answered that, "I feel hot." And then shortly, the student started to tighten it a bit. "How about now?" The jeep driver said, "It's a bit suffocating." And then finally, the student was almost choking and then immediately removed it. The jeepney driver was asked to explain how he was feeling. The jeepney driver said that, "I felt nauseous, couldn't breathe, it was so hot. It's a feeling I never want to feel again." Now, the student explained that in climate change, that's what we're experiencing now. That's what the Earth is experiencing now. If we don't do anything to change the way we're living, eventually the Earth will choke and it will die. And it's the only place that we live in. So from there, the student created a situation where the people themselves understood, and I believe that going home, they already felt the urgency, the great urgency that we needed to save Earth, that we needed to save the place that we're living in. Now, aside from these advocacies, we also have a few others. During election, we're actually very active. We conduct um, voters education. We also conduct political forums. And for good governance, we also partner. We're in close partnership with the Sungguniang Panglungsod ng Naga. Now, let's go back to the situation 2 years ago. Remember, the College of Law, the Ateneo de Naga College of Law, was established 2017. Then, late in December 2019. I remember this clearly. A report came out of China. I'm an avid reader of the New York Times. And when I first read that there was a virus, pneumonia-like illness coming out of China, I was alarmed. Why? Because the succeeding reports were that it was a form of the coronavirus. Now, I don't know if you guys remember, but we had SARS back then. And SARS is also a form of the coronavirus. In our subdivision, there was one case who was a suspected carrier of SARS. And back then, it was really very scary because I think I was 11 years old. And when I read that same kind of virus was coming out of China, I felt the same fear and apprehension, thinking, oh my God, it's another virus and it's also coming in from China. Now, as I kept reading, the symptoms were fever, breathing difficulties, and body aches. And patients were not responding to standard treatments for pneumonia. As January rolled by, I keep reading that some of the countries were in denial. But I myself was already very worried because I kept following the reports of China, especially that there was this one scientist that was being silenced. He was trying to tell the Chinese government that this virus is not a joke. But as we know of China, they're not much fans of information, of public dissemination of information. So, as a result, it rapidly spread throughout the world, and we now have lockdowns. I remember I was in Ateneo when it was announced that President Duterte was about to announce that entire Luzon would be put on lockdown. But before that, I remember Wuhan was set to be on lockdown and they announced it. As a result of the announcement, millions of people fled Wuhan. And I was thinking, one, the best way to ensure that people flee is that you tell them that they can't. If you tell someone they can't do it, more often than not, they would want to do it even more. So millions fled. Imagine those millions going around the world. Eventually, it reached the Philippines. And I think it was March 16 that President Duterte announced the lockdown. When the lockdown was announced, everything came to a standstill. Everyone was ordered to stay at home. People were only allowed outside under special circumstances. Everything was done online. I remember in the law school, we were all scrambling to switch, to transition to online classes. wala kami nun tulog. Just dealing with the students because, syempre, aside from the stress at home, especially those who had appors in their household, there was also the stress of transitioning to an online class. Not everyone was accustomed to online tools. So it was an adjustment. And then, because of the lockdown, everything that was scheduled now became online. One of the webinars that we were set to attend was the Migrant Workers Desk offered by the the International Pro Bono Alliance. Because of the lockdown, it was delivered online. Now, when I attended this, it was more so for me to learn how to establish a migrant workers desk because when I attended this one, I think it November or maybe October of 2019, maybe 2020. I'm not really good with dates. Back then we just had two desks, the jail desk and the environmental desk. So I was looking at how we could establish a migrant workers desk and how it would be run. Now, one of the speakers, Attorney Guy Mendez from the POEA, after her talk, she told us of a situation in Syria. She said that there were a number of migrant workers there who were stuck and needed to come home. But before they could come home, they needed first to be interviewed. And she told us that the staff in the Philippine embassy in Damascus, Syria, was not enough. They were understaffed and they weren't competent. Not really competent. Let's use competent. They're not really competent to conduct the interviews and to draft documents that would have legal effect. So during the program, she asked from the participants if any were willing to help, to volunteer, so that we could interview the migrant workers who were stuck in Syria. After the webinar, Dean Nina and I, Dean Nina Rences, she told me that, oh, you should get in touch with Attorney Pinky and ask her how we could offer our help. From there, I emailed Attorney Pinky and she immediately said yes. She told me, I asked her what's the situation, um, what would we need to do, and how can we do it. She told me that it's mostly an interview of trafficking in persons, victims of trafficking in persons. And because it was in the Middle East, more, most, not more, most of the victims were actually women. Now, when I was writing back and forth with Attorney Pinky, she said that it's better for us if we loop in Attorney Gain of POEA into the conversation. Now, when she created a group chat, we were talking in Messenger constantly. When she added Attorney Gain in our group chat, Attorney Gain immediately said, okay, let's have capacity building for the students because they need to at least, if they know already, you need at least to have a refresher of the topics that they would need to know once they do the interviews. She said, I'll do a talk. Maybe Attorney Pinky can do a talk. And we'll decide how we would conduct it in just a matter of 2 days, I think. 2 or 1.5 day, we were able to come up with an 8 lecture webinar that consisted of the Department of Justice, the Bureau of Immigration, the SWD, the POEA, and NAIA. Now, okay. So there was a referral network because we couldn't do it on our own. Ilaw could not have possibly done this without the help of IPBA. And if the POEA had not come in to connect us to all the government agencies, this project would not have been possible. It was actually POEA who got in touch with Charge d'Affaires Vida Soraya Versosa. And we actually met a number of times before the 8 lecture webinar. She was so grateful and she was really overwhelmed that help, the help that they needed came, that someone answered the call. Now, as an overview, we had to tell the students that, okay, you're going to have um, an 8 lecture webinar. This is in their practice court class. In Ateneo, we all we actually made 4 CLEP courses instead of just 2. So the 2 practice courts are now CLEP 3 and CLEP 4. So even before conducting the 8 lecture webinar, we gave them an overview of what they were about to get themselves into. And we told them it's mostly about interviewing victims of trafficking in persons. But what is human trafficking? Human trafficking is the acquisition and exploitation of people through means such as force, fraud, or deception. The practice ensnares millions of women and girls into modern day slavery, many of whom are sexually exploited. Now remember, I said a while back that when Attorney Gain asked for help, Attorney Pinky already said that most of the victims are women. And some might be sexually exploited. So we had to tell that to the students that you will be facing some sensitive answers, but you must be ready and you have to ask these hard questions. Now, for the 8 lecture webinar that was held last March 6, 2021, we had it, I think it was on a Saturday, and it was a marathon, really. Imagine 8 topics rolled and squeezed into just a day of, so it wasn't even a day, it was half a day, I think, because some of the speakers were most of the speakers actually were from different government agencies. It was the only common time that they had. Now, the first talk was on the law on illegal recruitment. This was delivered by Attorney Gain Mendez. She gave a crash course on illegal recruitment in the Philippines and a first-hand account of how cases of illegal recruitment run in the Philippines. Now, don't expect me to discuss everything about the 8 lecture webinar. I won't even pretend to know or be an expert at any of this, much less answer any specific questions regarding any of the topics. Now, um, the second topic was the Philippine law on human trafficking. It was delivered by Attorney Pinky, and it focused mainly on human trafficking laws, the Anti-Trafficking Persons Act of 2003. But remember, there's already an expanded Anti-Trafficking Act of 2012. It was the departure formalities for international bound passengers. Members of the Bureau of Immigration and NAIA gave a practical course on the stringent department protocols, specifically to root out potential traffic migrant workers. I remember when my aunt and cousin were flying out, even when they had the documents they needed, we were still waiting nervously to confirm if they were allowed to fly out. That's how strict the Bureau of Immigration and the NAIA are when it comes to passengers going out of the Philippines. They usually check. So maybe there's a hole in that process. Because if there was none, we wouldn't have the Syria project. Anyway, I digress. Now, the fourth talk was from Charge Fair Vida Soraya Versosa. She explained that there was really no law that specifically punished human trafficking in Syria. That's why, because if there's no law that punishes it, you can't really identify victims. You can't identify who is suffering from human trafficking in Syria. Outside of Syria, of course, we have specific laws, specific acts that would constitute human trafficking. In Syria, it was different. And in Syria, she explained that government officials were actually complicit. And how can you expect the government to punish itself? So it was really a problem. And she was very thankful for the Ateneo for giving our help. Now, the fifth lecture was disciplinary actions against foreign employers, again by POEA. Now, for here, what this is all from stock memory. So from here, I believe it was discussed that to have any course of action against foreign employers, it would have to go through administrative channels, and that's through the POEA. There would just, I think, the penalties would be sanctions for the employers. They would be blacklisted, so on and so forth. Now, for the sixth topic that day was the recovery and reintegration program for trafficked persons. It was a rundown of the government's various programs aimed at catering to the needs of the TIP victims. One of three, the government is actually offering three main services. It branches out eventually, but it's psychosocial, medical, and legal services for migrant workers who are victims of human trafficking. Now, for the seventh and I think most crucial topic of the day was the gender sensitive statement taking training. Here, it was a more intimate lecture because the speaker was telling the students that if you've experienced interviewing, if you already have an experience of interviewing clients, this is different. everything you think you know about conducting an interview goes out the window. Because these women are women who suffered at the hands of their employers. These are women who lived in violence, and only even little things can trigger them. So they have to be very careful, and they have to be very sensitive to what they're saying. Even asking the question triggers some. So they were taught how to handle that. How do you handle reactions from something you don't even mean? How do you comfort them? How do you talk to them in such a way that you're not condescending? So everything, every practice they were taught that day. Now, for the last talk for the day, the students were actually given this task. Because since you're the ones who are going to conduct the interview, it's best, I told them, it's best that you give a talk on this. First, it's forcing you to study even more than you already have. And it's forcing you to talk about it. Studying and talking about it would make it more natural for you when you do go out and interview and draft the judicial affidavits. Is very pleased with their presentation actually. And I think the lawyers who were in attendance that day said that they actually thought that the students were already lawyers because some, it's understandable. Students are almost always sticking to the rules, sticking to the exact provisions because they haven't yet exposed to practice. So they were saying that, oh, they're really very good and they really know their stuff. Okay. Are some just of the pictures. I think the picture from left to right, fourth picture, is Sergey de Fair Vida Soraya Versosa. We also have Attorney Pinky, Attorney Dine, and most of these are students. Let me check the picture. Only one here, I think, is not yet a lawyer because he just took the exam this November. Okay. Now, after they were given the 8 lecture webinar, someone texted me and informed that, attorney, your students are set to appear before the office of the executive judge, and they can now take their oath as level 2 student practitioners. God really works in mysterious ways. In Bicol, we have a term for this. It's masuripot. Masuripot talaga ang Diyos. And I was thinking that day, oh, wow, the students will now be fully authorized to conduct the interviews, and they already have the authority to draft and sign the judicial affidavits. Now, there's a funny and somehow worrying story about their oath taking. Let me just have a sip of water. Okay. Now, when they took their oath, one of the supervising lawyers tested positive for COVID. There was panic. It was pandemonium. Ang ingay sa group chat. They were worrying, oh my gosh, attorney, it's our first time to go out. Why is this happening? So you had to deal with all of the students panicking. And it was the first time that a courtroom was full. So most of the employees in the RTC were blaming us. Why did you allow the students to come in and take the oath? It was very stressful. But thankfully, we had all the students tested for COVID and none of them tested positive. Now, funny enough, the day after their oath was the day they started interviewing the tip victims. That was before, I can't remember. That was before they were told of the COVID scare. Now, how did we go about the interview of the tip victims? First, I constantly coordinate with the staff from the embassy. We would go back and forth and arrange the schedule because there's a time difference. I think it's 8 hours. No, maybe six. There's a time difference. So we had to time it so that the embassy there was open, still open. But she assured me that even if it was after working hours, they would work around it and would still they would still help the tip victims, and they would still stay in the office so that they can assist the victims there in Syria. Now, for the first day, we had three initial interviews. It was 3 p.m. on a Saturday. And after we've determined the time, the staff from Syria would then send out the Google Meet link. I then would send it to my students. I attended. I had to attend all of the interviews because even if they were already certified as level 2, I still needed to supervise them and make sure that they don't screw up. They didn't. Now, after the interviews would usually run from 2 to 3 hours. The longest was 4 hours, and the shortest was like 2 hours. Now, after the actual interview, we gave the students a number of days to draft the judicial affidavits because most of the interviews, if not all, were conducted in Tagalog because some could do it in English, but most prefer that it be done in Tagalog. And it's more effective that way. There won't be a communication barrier if we use Tagalog. So from there, the students would need to do everything in Tagalog as it was in the interview. Every single thing they needed to put in the judicial affidavit. And of course, they needed to make the necessary translations from Tagalog to English. So it took them maybe, I think, 4 days to draft at least one judicial affidavit. For every interview, there would be two students. I usually let them pick who gets to, not usually, I let them pick who gets to do the interview and who gets to transcribe. Now, after they've done the judicial affidavit, they submit it to me for checking. It's either to me or one of our supervising lawyers, but all of the judicial affidavits passed through me because I was the one who sent them to the embassy in Damascus. So I go through it, check that everything's there, that everything's signed, all the details are correct. So it was very long, and I don't want to say tedious. Let's just say it was a very long day whenever I'm checking the judicial affidavits, because you have to read everything, and just if you just read one, it's gonna ruin your day entirely, because you're gonna see that there are evil, really evil people in this world, vile people, vermin lower than the pus that feeds on vermin. So if you read at least 5 judicial affidavits in one day, it's emotionally draining. I'll give you at least an overview of what I've read. Some of them were really tricked. Some Most of them were tricked. Some were told that they were gonna work in a European country, that they would be paid at least $400, but they're actually sent to Syria. And when they arrive, their phones are confiscated. They're not allowed to go out. If you even look at them, if they even look at their employers in the eyes, they were threatened, and the employers would say, "Look at me again and I'll take your eyes out." And some would actually be for simple things, from the husband until the wife, even the kids, abusing our fellow Filipinas. And it was a really hard read, really emotional read. Even now, I feel so frustrated. Okay. Um, some, there was, I can't really say specifics. There were some who would seek the aid of their agencies, but the agencies would say that we can't do anything about it because they're already your employers. You're under contract. So what they did was they escaped. They needed to escape. There was no other way for them. It was either stay, suffer, or be killed, or escape. It was everyone, every single one escaped, and they took refuge in the embassy in Damascus. But when they arrived there, the embassy was ill-equipped. I don't want to say. I want to be very diplomatic about it. It was not enough. They needed help. They needed help for the victims to be repatriated. They needed to be interviewed. So that's where we came in. Okay. Now, when when the Philippine embassy receives the judicial affidavit, they have the migrant workers, the victims of trafficking in persons, sign it there, and Charge d'Affaires Vida Soraya Versosa is the one who notarizes it. Once it's notarized, it's put inside the evidence packet that they bring with them when they come home to the Philippines. Now, using that evidence packet, once they reach home, the POEA takes charge. They're the ones responsible for filing criminal cases against the human traffickers here in the Philippines. Now, for this project, 24 of our students took part. So 24, and they were able to interview 13 tip victims. From the month of March, that's when we started, we had 7 interviews. In the month of April, we only had 3. In the month of May, we only had 2. And in the month of June, we had just 1, for a total of 13. All of them were women. And you see the slight change from 8 to 3, then 2 to 1, because it depended on the dates, on the flights that they were scheduled to go. So if the victim is set to leave, let's say for this, the flight is scheduled on Sunday, we would usually do the interview on a Friday or on a Wednesday. The most is on a Friday morning there. So the students had to adjust. Now, this was a direct result of the Syria project. We found out about it when the Philippine embassy in Syria tweeted out that Haja Paksa, a considered big fish, was arrested thanks to the evidence packet, the judicial affidavits that they had identifying this Haja Paksa of human trafficking. Of course, our very, very special dean is mentioned here. ADNO official Dean Nina Rances. She's this Pakstul Haja Paksa was based in Zamboanga, and there were a number of news sites, the Philippine Daily Inquirer, the Manila Bulletin. I think there was also one in Rappler, who hailed the significant milestone for the Philippine Embassy in Syria, because I think by July 26 of 2021, all of the victims who were stuck in the shelter were repatriated to the Philippines. And this, as a result, was the arrest of the mastermind of human trafficking in Zamboanga. To end, I was asked, I had an interview way back in 2021 with the Asia Foundation asking me about the Syria project, because they hailed it as one of the shining examples of clinical legal education. They asked me how what was the value of Syria? Does it help make your students become better lawyers? And I said, well, how are they not? Even before they became lawyers, they were already practicing. They already conducted the interviews. They were already immersed in real life cases. And this one was at an international level. More than doing the interviews themselves, they were exposed to the fact that not all cases are simple. That sometimes, most of the time actually, if you're into legal aid, it's gonna pull at your heartstrings. It's gonna inspire something in you. And I said, they're all the better for it. They learned that they're very lucky and that they had the power to help. They're at a unique position to help people. People who are vulnerable, people who are marginalized, people who are underserved. And I think they were also given quality education because to do is to learn. And I keep saying that the Syria project was experiential learning at its best. It also enforced the rationale behind the revision of the law student practice rule, that it wanted to provide students clinical legal education and it wanted to broaden access to justice. So, in so doing, the Syria project, we actually achieved both of those. They learned and they served. To end, let's all have a collective mindset to end human trafficking. Not just in the Philippines, not just in Syria, but all over the world. Imagine if we could replicate the Syria project in all law schools and all law schools servicing all the embassies around the world. Imagine the impact, imagine the scale of the things that we will achieve. Imagine the families that would be relieved, that would be reunited if we would do this on a larger scale. So, to end my presentation, I urge you to consider this as a program in your legal aid clinics. And maybe we can partner with you so that we can help our migrant workers who I've this topic is also close to me because my brother is a seafarer, he's a migrant worker. So let's help the families and do everything in our power, in our abilities, so that people who need them the most can have it. Thank you.